Hello and welcome to American Friction, the weekly US politics podcast out every Friday, which unpacks everything you need to know in the run-up to the election and keeps track of how many ice creams Joe Biden has eaten during his presidency. I'm Jacob Jarvis.
That's right, and that sounds very tasty. And I am Chris Jones, and we're joined by Nikki McCann Ramirez, as we are every week. Hello, Nikki.
Hi.
Oi, bruvs.
Very good, very good. Nikki, serious. As we've touched on, Biden is notorious for his love of ice cream.
Yes, it is known.
In fact, he goes mad for it. He goes bloody mad for it, doesn't he?
He does.
He does. I went very English.
You don't want to see him without his ice cream.
No, but if you were to be a flavour of ice cream, what flavour would you be?
Oh, easy. Probably like lime, like limon. Helado de limon.
Lime,
with, like...
surely that's a sorbet.
Yeah, it's a sorbet. Does it have to be like ice cream?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm pretty certain I said ice cream there.
Okay, fuck. If it was an ice cream, the truth is, I would probably be like a zhuzhed up vanilla, like vanilla lavender with honey
you know
or some
what?
shit.
People knock vanilla, but I think it's a solid flavour of ice cream.
I love it, but like good
it's a
vanilla
good
ice
base.
cream, like with the vanilla bean and like some nice little flavor notes in there. That like it does me. It does me.
Nice flavour notes.
They can be delicate if it's high quality. Chris, what flavour are you going for?
Gravy.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, gravy.
If anyone knows me,
Yeah,
I love gravy.
I think that's good.
I want gravy ice cream.
Does that
So
exist?
No, but it will.
Well, one that does exist, I was going to go for baked beans, but baked beans ice cream does exist. So I don't want to go for it because I want it to be ludicrous.
No, before we skip over that, tell everyone about your famous meal that you do.
My famous meal, gravy beans. Yeah, I put a bit of gravy powder in beans to thicken them up.
That
And
seems fine.
It elevates.
No, don't.
Thank you, Nikki. It elevates.
I'm sorry,
cheap
it's
beans.
more fine than gravy ice cream.
Yeah, that's
No,
a
it's
fair
fine.
Who
point.
wants a milky gravy?
I had as a child a recurring nightmare.
Sorry.
where...
Sorry. Isn't US gravy creamy?
No, there's different kinds of gravy.
No, I'm sorry.
No.
Not having it.
But yeah, I had a recurring nightmare when I was a child that I got forced to put ketchup on some ice cream and eat it.
You would enjoy that, actually.
Whilst I was on holiday, and it always tasted bad, but out of stubbornness, I ate it in the dream. I'd be a vegan sausage roll flavour ice cream. Because it's
I
both
once had
pretentious-
octopus flavored ice cream.
No, that's a Limp Bizkit album. Anyway,
good.
we've had some nice ice cream chat, and now let's get serious. On to the show. So the wheels have well and truly fallen off of the Trump campaign.
And
with
this
the former
podcast.
president resorting to just doing a cursed DJ set at a recent rally rather than answering any more questions.
Yeah, weird, wasn't it? And we'll be joined by journalist Justin Glawe to discuss why the race for the White House might just be decided by the result in Georgia.
That we will. And we've got a listener question, and Chris is back, so it's time for the numberoos. And if you're wondering on that ice cream fact about Biden that I teased at the beginning, on the calculation that he eats 3 a day, he's on 4,101 since he became president. Welcome back.
That's a lot of
You're
ice
listening.
cream.
It is. You're listening to American Friction. Before we begin, a reminder of an announcement we made last week, but it's a brand new announcement again because Chris is going to make it because he's back and it's his turn. Chris, tell us about the American Friction Patreon page and why everyone should sign up.
Well, it's very good.
Yes.
And it's very nice.
Indeed.
And it's more of us.
It is
and it's
more of
more
us.
of this.
Exactly.
And there's absolutely no reason not to. It's £3 minimum, which isn't a lot.
and
a
that
month.
gets you ad-free episodes.
It does.
Exactly.
Go on, tell us the next tier then.
And then £5 a month, you'll get exclusive extra episodes, bonus stuff. So last week, Nikki and I spoke about how we got interested in American politics. And if you sign up now, there's going to be an extended version of the conversation I have with Dorian Lynskey about his new book, which is it's a very interesting chat, and I think it's worth a listen to.
Absolutely.
So go to patreon.com/American Friction to sign up. There's a link in the show notes. Don't worry, everyone else, you'll still get all of our election day coverage in the run-up to November. But look, we want to keep going beyond then, so we need your support. So go to patreon.com/American Friction.
Subscribe.
Nikki, ding that bell. Nikki, Trump has been at it again, and he's always at it. He said that Democrats want to ban cows and windows. As ever, I like just reading out what Trump says because it makes him sound more silly than paraphrasing it. They just come up. They want to do things like no more cows and no windows in buildings. They have some wonderful plans for this country. Honestly, they're crazy. And then he did an event where he just said, let's not do any more questions. Let's just listen to music. Let's make it into a music. Who the hell wants to hear questions, right? And danced for 9 songs.
Is danced the right word?
He can't
He
dance.
swayed.
It was a very romantic sway, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, the dude's 78. I think he did all right.
Fair, yeah,
He's got
fair
some
point.
moves.
Yeah.
Nikki, have the wheels just totally fallen off the Trump campaign? This does feel like a new step of just, really?
It's been an incredibly unfortunate week for the Trump campaign. He's had several interviews, which we're going to talk about, where it was just abundantly clear that he's a one-trick pony with 3 talking points who can't answer serious questions or give serious explanations to his policies. I think at this point he's canceled 3 major interviews in the last few weeks at a time when, you know, we're 18 days away from the election. Both candidates are theoretically supposed to be on a rigorous schedule of campaign events, interviews, town halls, press conferences, and he's canceling interviews. He's stopping rallies after answering, or stopping Q&A events after a few questions, because clearly he's struggling to answer questions. And the Pennsylvania rally was just incredibly bizarre because you had people, it was apparently so hot in the venue that you had people passing out in the crowd. And a couple questions in, 2 people have passed out. The rally keeps getting interrupted. Kristi Noem is there, looking for another dog to shoot, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think reporters there said that the musical extravaganza went on for almost an hour.
Yeah.
Which is like, what are you supposed to do with that? What are
The thing I found strangest as well was his reaction to the fainting people. He was like, "Oh, they're okay. They're all okay. Don't worry." And then he just goes, "Anyone else feel like fainting?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "What?"
And asks them to raise their hand.
Yeah, like, they didn't decide to faint. Clearly there's something not been run very well at the venue, or it's too hot or whatever. But like, show a little bit of sympathy for the people that do want to hear you speaking, I suppose. But yeah, it was very strange. Does it feel like, I don't know, there isn't an overarching strategy, is there? Or there's nothing new, at least, like you said. I mean, he's randomly going to Dem areas where you'd think it seems a bit pointless. He's repeating himself. There is no movement. There's no next step at all. And he's just speaking to groups who already seem to like him anyway, or then when he gets a chance to speak to people who could convince to like him, he doesn't seem to try to. I don't know. Is there a strategy I'm missing here?
Not really. I think it's abundantly clear that in these last couple days before Election Day, Trump is really trying to hammer home his 2 messages on the economy and immigration. He, in particular, has been on a speaking tour about the economy. He appeared at like the Economic Club of Detroit, another economic club in Chicago, where he sat down with Bloomberg. And in these interviews that are specifically about the economy, it was abundantly clear that Trump doesn't know shit about his own economic proposals. Like, he could not explain him. Yeah. He was interviewed by Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, whose name I will mispronounce, so I'm probably not going to try. But he was interviewed by Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, and the guy had to explain to Trump multiple times that tariffs, simply by the way they are structured and the fact that they've been a thing for hundreds of years in terms of like global economic policy, tariffs raise prices for consumers. And every time Trump was asked a question about, okay, so how are you going to resolve this or resolve that? How are you going to reduce prices? His answer would be tariffs. And then the Bloomberg guy would be like, well, tariffs actually raise prices. And Trump would just respond, no, tariffs.
I noticed as well, he quite regularly talks about making donuts as well. Like, he uses donuts as a metaphor, but I Googled it to try and find it. And he's done that a lot of times, to being like, you know, when you make donuts, you have stoves. And his whole thing is basically, it's as if the only problem within the economy is energy prices.
But first of all, donuts aren't made on stoves.
I mean, I've never tried. I also think donuts aren't quite that much of a backbone of the U.S. economy.
No.
The
entire U.S. economy runs on donuts and beer.
Yeah, it's donut-based neoliberalism is what we've got, which, Clinton's got a lot to answer for. Let's get on to some big words then, since I've just used a couple there, but incorrectly and stupidly. Trump has been called a fascist a bit more regularly lately. In part because he said he wanted to use the military against what he described as the enemy within. And then also Mark Milley in the book from Bob Woodward, which we mentioned a little bit last week. Bob Woodward, always keeping the scoops just to the right time. But apparently he called him a fascist to the core, and Waltz has repeated that. Do you think this is going to cut through at all, though?
I mean, I hate saying this. Yes and no. I think people have been calling Trump a fascist and an authoritarian and someone with dictatorial tendencies for years at this point. The problem is that I think as much as the American public knows who Trump is and knows who those tendencies are, the sort of overarching descriptors of like, oh, he's a fascist, don't necessarily cut through to his base anymore. His base sees it as an unfair attack. What does cut through, and this is why it's like a yes and no answer, this is the yes, is when you take concrete examples of those fascistic tendencies and explain them to voters. For example, Trump saying that he might feel the need to use the National Guard or the military to target the, quote, enemy within, which the second part of that quote was him actually naming what that perceived enemy is, and it was the radical left and people who oppose him politically. So you can call Trump a fascist, and it is true, and to an extent, it is effective on people who tend to be a little more liberal, moderate, democratic-leaning. But if you really want to cut through to those undecided, sort of conservative-leaning voters, what works is the actual concrete examples of what that fascism looks like, of weaponizing the military, of putting migrants in mass deportation centers that are essentially concentration camps, of crafting laws throughout the United States that would strip women of their bodily autonomy. Those kinds of things that are concrete examples of fascist policies resonate a lot more with voters than just being like, oh yeah, this guy wants to be a dictator.
Chris, then, what does polling show us about the appeal of the sort of authoritarian rhetoric that we hear from Trump?
It's mixed. What I will say is that anyone with compassion, really, he probably isn't part of any of the polling that we see, disagrees with pretty much everything that Trump says about immigration. But if you look at the polling that we do have, there was some that was given to Rolling Stone exclusively. God, we mentioned them a lot in this episode, aren't we? Oh my God.
Nikki writes for them.
She does, that's right.
She's part of Big Rolling Stone.
Yeah, that's right.
I got my Rolling Stone t-shirt on today.
Very good.
Wow.
That is a
One
t-shirt.
star.
But if we back to the series point now,
of course,
if we look at the polling that was given to them, there are a lot of people that actually agree with Trump's rhetoric around immigrants, calling them criminals, and specifically the poisoning the blood of America. In fact, according to this survey that's from the University of Massachusetts and Amherst, only 32% of Trump voters and 37% of Republicans outright disagree with that final statement there. And that was in that Rolling Stone article that I mentioned. But I don't think this is entirely shocking. We've known for a while that Republicans in general feel, pretty angry about immigration on the whole compared to Democrats. And Pew Research did some research, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, in June, and only 36% of all Republican voters compared to 87% of Democratic voters agreed with this statement. America's openness to people from all over the world is essential to who we are as a nation. And if you look back at data compared to 2016, that way of thinking for Republican voters certainly seems to have increased.
On to a final Trump event to mention now. The Univision town hall. I think I said that right. Univision. I nearly went for Univision and also nearly wrote Eurovision and was afraid I might stumble. There's not really a lot of point of saying I was worried about stumbling and then telling you what stupid thing I nearly said. So it's not really like dodging it, but dodging. It's not really like dodging it. Anyway, so yeah, he was pretty awful at this event, I take it. There was quite a standout question from one attendee, which has been going a little bit viral on the internet, hasn't there, where the answer from Trump was relatively revealing.
Yeah, so this was a town hall event specifically around Latino voters and the issues of concern to Latino voters. And before we get into this viral moment, I want to talk about the format of the interview and how Trump responded to it. So people in the audience were allowed to ask questions in either English or Spanish, and they had a translator present who would translate any of the questions in Spanish for Trump. One voter asked him a question in Spanish about whether or not he believed what he said, like whether he really believed all of the stuff people were saying about Haitian migrants eating pets in Springfield, Ohio was actually true, despite all the debunks from city officials. And Trump's response was to double down, say he was just repeating what's being reported, but then also complaining that immigrants need translators. In a town hall full of Spanish-speaking people, I think his quote was something along the lines of, these migrants arriving into Springfield, they're like searching wildly for interpreters, but we can't let them ruin the country. So if you're trying to make an appeal to Latino voters, many of whom are bilingual or only speak Spanish, saying it ruins the country to need more translators is probably not going to win you a lot of brownie points.
Yeah.
But
well,
the
from
question
looking
that
very quickly, it's like 13% of the population speaks Spanish in the US. So it's like it's not like
I
it's
am
a
part
small
of that
amount
percentage
of people. Yeah. And that's
but
all I had to do was Google.
And
that's right.
I mean, sorry to butt in there, Nikki, but this was a massive opportunity for Trump to
Yeah.
win over Latino voters, or at least some of them, because this is a demographic where it's quite hard to tap into. And polling and stats show that a lot of Latinos have stopped voting because they don't feel like they're represented. So this was a chance for Trump to gain, as you say, some brownie points and actually sound like a serious politician. And it just didn't go that way, did it, Nikki?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there was one really clear moment, the viral clip Jarv is referencing, when a man stood up, told Trump that he was a former registered Republican who was now an independent, who had been really disappointed by everything that happened in the aftermath of the 2020 election and was very hesitant to vote for Trump, given that so many of his former administration officials have come out against him and have said they are not voting for him again. So the man pretty directly told Trump, like, I want to give you the opportunity to win back my vote. Yeah. And polling has shown that January 6th is a very, like, overrepresented election issue for Latino men specifically. Trump responded by essentially saying, I am still mad at Mike Pence for not giving me the 2020 election. The people who went to the Capitol on January 6th did nothing wrong. He described it as a day of love. And yeah insane. And he basically told the guy, like, I hope someday I'll get your vote. Sounds like I probably won't. And that's okay. And like, we know Trump believes that he won the 2020 election. We know he doesn't like Mike Pence. He basically said that, like, oh, those people who used to work for me, who now say they're not going to vote for me, they just want attention. But to say that on national television 18 days before an election to a former Republican voter who is asking you to convince him to vote for him, telling you, this is your chance, tell me why I should vote for you, it is the most egregious of fumbles. And it goes to show the lack of discipline that Trump has had. Not just, he's been undisciplined throughout most of his political career, but especially in the last days of a campaign, the fact that he's not able to pull it together and have an elevator pitch answer for a voter who's asking for that convincing argument, I think it was a really emblematic moment of all of this sort of chaos and instability we're seeing in Trump in these last few weeks.
Yeah, well, when we live in such a soundbite era as well, he's allowed that to go viral for how shit he looked. When I don't think you even have to be a very talented politician to go, oh, well, you know, my interpretation of January 6th might be slightly different to yours, but I hear your concerns. This is what I'm going to do with my next term.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I still think it would have been a shit answer.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he could have made it so it at least didn't go viral for how bad it was in quite a simple way.
I don't
And
know
you
if
could
this
tell. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, you go, Nikki.
I was just gonna say you could tell that the crowd at that town hall was not vibing with him.
No.
What I was going to say is, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but the actions of Trump, specifically, you know, over the past few weeks and month, it just screams of a man who's desperate for this to be over. Like, he just seems like he doesn't have the energy anymore. And that's why we saw the weird dancing and the let's not take any more questions. Let's just listen to music.
Who wants to answer questions?
Exactly. And this lackluster performance with Latino crowds, which could be such a massive like goldmine for him for this election. And he just didn't make the effort. It screams of a man who's exhausted, tired, and just wants this to be over as quickly as possible.
I would agree with all that, but I'd also say it represents just how entitled he is. You know, he doesn't think he should have to convince people for his vote. Because they go, well, I'm Trump. That's why you should vote for me because I deserve to be president, which is, not really, not a very smart way to run a campaign. On to Harris then. She was on Fox News, Nikki. How did that go? It was a little bit spicy.
It was a little bit spicy. I think she actually did really well. I like that version of her a lot more than the kind of soft-spoken, very like measured version of Kamala Harris we've been getting in a lot of these interviews. I think fundamentally the Fox News interview was a shot across the bow to her critic. It was a bit of a middle finger to all the people who say she's scared of doing interviews. She doesn't do adversarial interviews. She can't answer tough questions. I think she did a really good job not letting Brett Baier take control of the interview and sort of run over her. Brett Baier is an interesting figure because probably around a little bit before the 2020 election, but really in the aftermath of the 2020 election, like Fox News made a really concerted effort to try and split its television newsroom into like hard news anchors and entertainment anchors. That was the justification they used to give for Tucker Carlson in like lawsuits against the network, that viewers shouldn't trust what Tucker Carlson says because Tucker Carlson wasn't a reporter, he was an entertainer. And that like Fox News had entertainers who were separate from their news division. And Brett Baier was one of the figures who was sort of held up as the standard bearer by Fox News of their hard news division. But fundamentally, Brett Baier is a partisan hack who has the same interests as any other person at Fox News. He wants to see Trump get elected. And this interview, the questions from Baier really felt like just a laundry list of right-wing talking points and, you know, grievances that the network has. I think one of the most telling interviews that Harris handled brilliantly was Baier questioning her about her calling Trump a fascist, highlighting the statements Trump made about the enemy from within. Earlier on Wednesday, when this interview took place, Trump had a separate town hall on Fox News. It was ostensibly about women. I think it took them an hour to get to a question about women. It was just an audience of women. But there really weren't that many questions about like electoral issues affecting women. But during that town hall, Fox News played a portion of the clip in which Trump made the statements about the enemy from within, the radical left. But Fox cut out the portion of Trump's statement where he threatened to use the military against his political opponents. So when Baier asked that question to Harris, asked her to respond to her statements, like asked her to justify how she was characterizing Trump, they played the same clip they had played Trump without the mention of the military. And Harris called him out. She was like, that is an incorrect quote, and you are misrepresenting what Trump is saying to the people. And the reason I am calling him an authoritarian is because he is threatening to use the military. And she basically said that it does a disservice to voters to edit a clip in that fashion. So I think she handled it really well. I think going into a lion's den like Fox News, which is fundamentally the propaganda arm of Trump's campaign, isn't necessarily about convincing Fox News's core viewership that they should vote for her. It's about showing that the criticisms about her being scared are unfounded, and about maybe creating those viral moments that will then reach some undecided conservative leaning like moderates or independents. And I think she executed quite well.
I think that given as well that Trump suggested that after 60 Minutes were accused of editing a Kamala Harris clip, that they should have their broadcast license revoked and sold off to the highest bidder. I wonder if he considers that should also happen to Fox News. But I'm guessing
he's in like a weird love-hate relationship with Fox.
Yeah.
Like he likes the news anchors like Sean Hannity, Jesse Waters, the ones who just heap praise upon him. But he definitely had a cooling off period in the aftermath of the 2020 election, because if our listeners will recall, Fox News did get sued over the election conspiracies they promoted, and they ended up having to settle like an almost $1 billion lawsuit to Dominion voting systems.
$800 million or something.
Yeah,
crazy,
it was an insane amount. But essentially, the network then had to tone down the amount of conspiracies they aired about the election because they ran the risk of getting sued again, and that really pissed off Trump. So there was like an 8-month period where I think he wouldn't grant them an interview. And to this day, sometimes if they like air a poll that isn't favorable to him, he'll like post on Truth Social about it and get really mad. But it's still a useful network for him, so he still goes on there.
What do we think of the Trump playlist then, finally, on this section? So this is from Billboard. They listed it out. There was Rufus Wainwright's cover of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You, Oliver Anthony's Rich Men North of Richmond, Guns N' Roses' November Rain, James Brown's It's a Man's World, Elvis, An American Trilogy, The Village People's YMCA, and Andrea Bocelli's Time to Say Goodbye. And I think Memory from Cats was in there as well at some point.
He loves musicals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, he's a huge musical guy. He loves the Phantom of the Opera.
Me and Trump going to see Rocky Horror together, is it? I don't want to imagine the costume. No. Anyway, what was your favourite track among those? I really enjoyed as well. There was Ave Maria, and when he said they gave me the version without the words, and then played it again, the Pavarotti version, to get the words in. But yeah, from that list, what was your favourite song, Chris?
Sad one, but Time to Say Goodbye, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty
a
big.
Good tune. But I mean, it's a very sad wedding, whichever wedding he's DJing there, isn't it? It's not bopping.
Nikki,
sure.
What do you reckon?
I think the problem is I love all these songs. Nothing Compares to You, because Justice for Sinead O'Connor, I think I was concerned she was going to rise from the grave and just slap him across the face for using her music at a rally, because she hated the man. But yeah, it's unfortunate because I think there's more overlap in my musical taste with Trump than I would like to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go for YMCA just because I think it's always so funny how much he goes for it. It's the same as when he uses Macho Man, and you're like, you're meant to be this right-wing, macho, authoritarian guy. I don't know if you're interpreting these songs quite in the way they are suggested to be interpreted.
The crowd there were really loving it when he suggested YMCA.
Yeah.
They're really going for it. Right, let's continue our tour of US swing states. And this week we're focusing on Georgia, where early voting has just begun. Turnout there in the first 24 hours has smashed the record, with over 300,000 people casting their ballot either by mail or in person, double what it was in 2020. And speaking of 2020, Joe Biden's victory was the first for his party since 1992 in Georgia, and it was an incredibly close victory at that, with the Democrats taking the state by just 0.2% of the vote.
It's a huge state in the race for the White House this year, and a race that is almost impossible to call. Joining us now is Georgia-based journalist and researcher Justin Glawe, who's written for the likes of The Guardian, Vice, and Rolling Stone, my personal favorite, not that I'm biased, as well as many others. Justin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Justin, let's start off nice and simple. We always ask our journalists or experts that we have on from a state to just give us a brief overview of the politics within the state that they're in. So could you give us a flavor, I guess, of what political issues really do matter to voters in Georgia at the moment?
Well, that's a good question. I'm
full of them.
I think, yeah. I mean, I don't know what issues people could still be deciding on, right? Like, I mean, we've known who both of these candidates are for a long time now. I mean, we've known who Donald Trump is for 40 years. But it's probably the economy. For the right-leaning folks, every state is a border state now, apparently. So maybe there's some immigration concerns in there. There's a lot of farming in Georgia, so there's a lot of undocumented immigrants who keep us in having good food and things like that. So I think it's generally the economy. Obviously there's like a big port down in Savannah, that provides a lot of jobs. So I think it's probably pretty similar to what it is in other swing states. I don't think that Georgia is any sort of special outlier when it comes to voters' concerns in what they're looking for in a candidate.
One of the things that has stood out for me in Georgia is black voters, especially. I think it's about a third of the electorate that are black voters. And a friend of mine, Benji High, who's a journalist, was in Georgia not too long ago speaking to black communities around Georgia. And some of the things that they were saying was that they almost felt disillusioned with Kamala Harris, and that Trump was a strong businessman who would fight to the death for America. Is that a thought that has much ground amongst a lot of black communities in Georgia, or are many of them now rallying around Kamala Harris because she's someone that they perhaps see themselves in?
Yeah, I mean, I think black women especially are, I mean, I think that like those early voting numbers that you mentioned at the top here, I look, I'm no political polling expert or anything like that, but like I don't see a scenario in which a record-shattering day of early voting bodes well for Republicans. I think that signals that Democrats especially are really, really fired up. And I mean, let's not forget that in Georgia and in elsewhere, it was black female voters that stopped Trump last time. And I think that has, the black male voters that's a different subject. And yes, they, obviously Trump he's always sort of polled pretty well, considering that he's like an outright racist among black male voters. Not really sure why that is, but so like those numbers really haven't changed. And I think if I remember my polling right, they may have even increased since 2020. But among black female voters, I mean, I think that's again what it's going to come down to, and I think that they're probably going to come out in huge numbers and stop him again. And I think that's probably what those early voting numbers that you mentioned reflect. I'll also say that the talk about black male support for Trump, it is interesting, and it does seem high based off of what we know about Trump's views on race and things like that. But last year, a couple of years ago, when I was out doing a story on Herschel Walker's candidacy, and I was talking with black voters and saying, oh, hey, are you going to support this guy? He's from Georgia, and and what I heard from black men, especially in Herschel's hometown, was like, look, we know who Trump is. It doesn't take a genius to read between the lines of what Trump says in regards to race. To know that he is not somebody that's going to be supportive of us. So, while there may be increasing black male support for Trump, like I just don't see it as something that's going to push him over the edge, beyond what he needs to get. Like, I just don't see that happening.
What about race? Really for Republicans more widely within Georgia, because I think actually it was in one of your articles that I read that Georgia didn't elect a black lawmaker until 2020, and then even when they did, there was basically segregation that was reintroduced, and there was massive uproar from Republicans. So if Harris were to win, in 3 weeks or so, how much uproar and unrest do you think that we could see from Republicans in Georgia?
Well, the question is, a lot is the answer to that. And then the secondary question really becomes, well, how will the checks and balances hold up as Republicans revolt against a Harris win? And what's interesting about Georgia compared to all of the other swing states is that Georgia is the only swing state that doesn't have a Democratic backstop. And what I mean by that is that, our Secretary of State and our governor are Republicans. In all the other swing states, so when it comes down to the certification of the election results at the state level, in all the other swing states, that comes down to a Democrat who's either or both a Secretary of State or a governor. And in Georgia, that comes down to Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp, who are both Republicans. Now, they're sort of self-styled like moderate Republicans somewhat. And by moderate, I mean they didn't completely, fold when Trump tried to overturn the results of the last election. But, a Harris win here is going to be met with widespread disbelief and a massive uptick in claims of election fraud. And so the question then becomes, how will Raffensperger and Kemp respond to that? And when the pressure comes again from Trump and the RNC, which it will, how will they respond to that pressure? And will they cave, or, will they do their duty under the law to certify, what may very well be a Harris win in Georgia?
So, Justin, you've written a lot about how that lack of a backstop, that Republican control of the Georgia government, has turned the state into a bit of a sandbox in which Republicans are testing out ways to challenge election laws, change voting regulations, really transform the way the electorate can participate in elections within the state. Could you explain to our listeners a little bit about the research you've been doing and what you've uncovered?
Yeah, sure. So, since 2020, Georgia has looked like what a lot of Republican states and what a lot of the country has looked like, where it has there's been a battle between sort of more moderate Republicans and like the election denial wing, right? And that power struggle continues to this day, where Kemp and Raffensperger, the governor and the Secretary of State, kind of represent the side of the Republican Party that will abide by the law and follow the rules and the norms of our election process. And then the other side of it is this full-on election denialism, where basically any result of an election that doesn't result in a Trump win is seen as totally suspect and probably fraudulent and therefore can't be trusted. And so what's been happening in the last 4 years is that side has really taken over every aspect of our election systems here, except the governor's office and the Secretary of State. So, there's election deniers that sit on county election boards throughout the state. In recent months, they have taken a trio of pro-Trump election deniers have taken over the state election board. And as a result of SB 202, which was, the big voter suppression law passed in 2020, basically in response to Trump losing here, Raffensperger was kicked off the state election board, and that sort of facilitated this pro-Trump election denial takeover of the state election board. And since then, they've just gone completely off the rails and have introduced all sorts of rules that affect how the votes can be counted and how they can be certified. And however, just in this past few days, a lot of those rules have been struck down by a judge here. So they kind of got called out for that. But like all these people still remain. And so there's still lots of room for bad acts and bad actors following, November 5th.
And I think if listeners remember, Georgia went into a runoff election in 2020, and there was a massive effort by both Democrats and Republicans to turn out votes. Do you feel that similar efforts are taking place preemptively within Georgia? Is this massive spike we're seeing in early voting turnout related to the aftermath of 2020? This notion that like Georgia really became sort of the center of the firestorm for Trumpism and the like stop the steal movement within the context of an ongoing runoff election, that now Georgia voters are really the state in the country that's gotten the message that you need to come out early, you need to come out in numbers, and that both sides are trying to make a win so undeniable that there won't be a repeat of 2020. I don't know if I'm making sense there.
Yeah, for sure. No, I do think that is the case, and that has been the messaging. What is perhaps a little bit different than 2020 is, my take about what the Trump campaign looks like here is that they have not been as robust about a ground game operation as Harris has. Like, especially when, Harris, came in at the top of the ticket and took over for Biden, there was a really concerted effort to stand up a ground game here in Georgia, and Trump just hasn't really done that this time around. And part of that is because I've begun to think of Trump's efforts here and elsewhere as like the no campaign. Like, he doesn't really have a traditional sort of political campaign in like, here's my get out the vote efforts. Here's my policy. It's really about like, this is who I am. It's immigration. It's bad migrants. It's I'm better for the economy. Yeah, and it's they're going to steal the election from me, right? Like, the campaign is focused on laying the groundwork to sow distrust about the results of the election, and really to create an excuse for if and when he loses. So like that's what it's looked like in Georgia. It's more like, let's get ready to go for these legal battles in courts and through lawsuits about contesting the results of the election. Like, it seems to me like that's where the energy has been focused. And, he'll give lip service to like too big to rig. And, we need to have huge turnout so that we can overcome the cheating that Democrats are going to engage in. But really, it seems like the energy has been more focused on how to contest this thing, both in a political narrative way and legally through lawsuits.
It's interesting you say that, because we are hearing very similar things about their ground game in like Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Right.
That there's not really the conservative sort of door knocking, turn out the vote effort from Republicans that there is from the Harris campaign. Yeah. So if you're worried about the polls, maybe that's a little hope.
I'm always worried about the polls.
Oh yeah, we're constantly worried about the polls.
You know me. Come on. What I was going to say is, so listening to you then, Justin, it's an inevitability then, essentially, that if Trump loses, especially in Georgia, that it's going to be contested and they're gonna say it was stolen no matter what. And for me as a Brit, that just seems ludicrous. Do you ever just have to pinch yourself that this is the situation that you have?
I mean, what's crazy to me is that like we know all of this is coming, right? Like they are saying this out loud, and they have put the systems and the people in place to facilitate the next big lie about the election. And so like it's just sort of crazy that like we all know that this is coming. We all know exactly what they're going to say, and they're going to and there's two primary planks of what will be Trump's claims to a stolen election. Number one, undocumented immigrants voted. Not true in really any measurable way in this election. In any presidential election, there's really no evidence, excuse me, that undocumented immigrants vote in any significant measure at all.
Yeah.
And by significant measure, I mean like tens, maybe. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, in Pennsylvania, they're going to say, oh, well, you know, we were leading on election night, and then the mail-in ballots started coming in, and all of a sudden we started losing again. A replay of 2020, and as Oswin Swepsang and I reported in Rolling Stone the other day, Republicans in Pennsylvania purposefully stopped the ability of county election workers to count mail-in ballots before election day. So this phenomenon of Trump leading and then starting to lose as the mail-in ballots are starting to be counted, which can't happen until we know this is going to happen. We knew it was going to happen in 2020. We know it's going to happen now. But he's going to say, well, I was leading on election night, and then all these fraudulent mail-in ballots started coming in, and then I started losing. And going back to
count.
Yeah, stop the count, right? And going back to the undocumented voters thing, we know this is going to happen because Republicans have filed at least 50 voter purge lawsuits across the country, making really specious claims that non-citizens are voting. J.D. Vance has talked about it. Cleta Mitchell has talked about it. Lara Trump has talked about it. House Speaker Mike Johnson has talked about it. So, like, this is clearly the emerging political narrative of a stolen election. And again, it's like, we know all of this is coming. So the best thing that I can do is just like put it out there and be like, hey, this is what's going to happen. So like, don't be surprised when these claims start being made. Now, whether, obviously millions of Americans are going to believe this. They're not reading people like me, and they're not, consuming this fact-based information. But, that's the lay of the land as we sit here today.
Well, speaking of election deniers and just all-round losers, really, I think it's fair to say, Marjorie Taylor Greene, which we try not to mention too much on this podcast, but sometimes it happens.
And we fail.
Yeah, and as I'm speaking to someone in Georgia, I kind of have to bring her up. People are saying she's 99% on, 99% going to win the 14th district. Is that your thoughts as well? And how do people generally feel in Georgia about her?
I mean, she's got a gerrymander district that's, a lock for her, and up there, I mean, yeah, she's very popular, but, where I live in Savannah, she's she's considered to be, even crazier than Trump is. I mean, she is an indication of a very dark and insane path of future republicanism. I mean, she is just a wholly unserious person who has no business whatsoever. But here's the thing. Marjorie Taylor Greene I see a reflection of her in the county election officials that I've been investigating over the last 4 years. Marjorie Taylor Greene is, she is sort of a prototype of some of the people that I see who sit on these county election boards who, when I look at them, I go, these people shouldn't be in the position of power administering elections in Spalding County or Gwinnett County or whatever. they shouldn't have that power. That they're out there. They believe in conspiracy theories that are just completely without merit. And yet here they are. So like, it's just even more insane that she's a member of Congress, right? Like if she was on one of these county election boards, I would go, hey, here's one of these kooks who's on a county election board that shouldn't be there, but she's, has even more power than that. And, that's part of the reason why the newsletter that I write is called American Doom, because when I look at people like her, I'm just like, how do we come back from a situation, an environment where someone like her is seen as like, yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm going to vote for her for Congress, like it's crazy.
And she's not made many friends really within the GOP, or she's lost friends, but she's still backed by people like Trump, some powerful people still. And although she's kind of in this wilderness, kind of almost wilderness position within the GOP at the moment, she's still like, I guess, fairly young when you consider other US politicians. Does she have a big future still to play in US politics, especially within the Republican sphere?
I mean, that's like the $1 million question, right? Like, is there going to be a return to sanity, like post-Trump? Like part of what Marjorie Taylor Greene represents, and you heard Colin Allred in his debate with Ted Cruz the other day mention something.
Great debate.
Like what he was pointing out, he said Ted Cruz basically is a guy who like gets into Congress and he goes and he stands up on the floor of the Senate and he just like does his best to make a clip that will go viral and get him another hit on Fox News, right? And Ted Cruz and Jim Jordan and people like that, they sort of like started that phenomenon of like the do-nothing Republicans who really exist to just like foment culture war outrage and they don't really govern, they don't really do anything. They just go up there and they do things that will get them on TV. And like Marjorie Taylor Greene is like that on steroids, like that's all she exists to do is make a viral moment. And unfortunately, in my opinion, there's people on the Democratic side like Jasmine Crockett from Texas who are sort of like, they're doing that same thing, right? And so, the question is, will the Republican Party post-Trump return to a place where like people actually try to govern, right, and do things that help their constituents? Or will we just continue going down this carnival barker path where it's like you can get elected and just keep getting elected because people think you're a fighter and you piss off the libs and like have a viral TikTok thing? You know what I mean? Like that's the question of what the future holds.
And then you said that was the $1 million question, but I actually think this is the $1 million question because no one's dared answer it yet.
No one will.
I'm trying, Nikki. Someone will. Justin, who's going to win the election?
Oh.
Go on, do it.
I mean, it depends. Look, who wins the House? Like, that's my question, right? Who wins the House and who holds the House on January 3rd, 3 days before the House has to certify the results of the election? Honestly, Kamala Harris sneaks out a win here, right? I think she does, just barely. Then the question becomes, what happens? Like, whatever is going to happen on November 5th is going to happen, right? The question is, what happens between November 6th and January 6th? And then what happens on January 6th? Because there is a handful of scenarios with which Republicans in Congress can, and I'll use my one curse word here, can rat fuck a Harris win.
Contingent election?
And a contingent election is probably the worst and I think maybe one of the
least likely.
The least likely, but there are other scenarios that end up taking the election out of the hands of the popular vote and the Electoral College and putting it in the hands of a Republican-controlled House of Representatives or a Republican-controlled Senate. And I'd like to point out my last point on this is that You've got reporters asking people like J.D. Vance, do you believe that Trump lost 2020? Who cares? Like, yeah. Oh, well, what are you going to do in 2024? Who cares? J.D. Vance has no power, right? And then you've got, people asking House Speaker Mike Johnson, will you accept the results of the election? Instead of asking that very broad question that allows Mike Johnson a lot of room to dance, right? They need to be asking him very specific questions about technical, hypothetical scenarios regarding certification of the results. What will you do if you get dual slates of electors from Georgia? What will you do if somehow the certificate of ascertainment from Georgia Governor Brian Kemp doesn't make it by the deadline set by the Electoral Count Reform Act? And because I want to know what those answers are from Mike Johnson, because that will tell us whether he is thinking about the answers to these questions, right? I think Harris wins. And then the question is, do Republicans actually let her win, right?
So it's kind of a half answer, I guess.
It's more than you've gotten from anyone else, Chris.
I was going to say, until that last line, I was prepared to say it's the best swerve of that answer I've ever heard. But you kind of
No, I think that's very good, because it is true that so much of this does hinge on the House and the Senate.
Exactly.
And as always, the presidential race is just dominating any sort of discussion. But I do think Democrats have a chance to flip the House. I'm more worried about the Senate than I am the House.
Well, we will very much see when the time comes. Just before you go, you've got a book coming out. What's it called, and when is it out?
Well, I know what it's called.
Meant to be out?
I know what it's called. When it comes out, I think depends on what happens between November 6th and January 6th. It's called
valid.
Yeah, it's called "If I'm Coming to Your Town, Something Terrible Has Happened," and it is a memoir about the last 10 or 12 years of me reporting on all sorts of insane stuff in this country and in other countries, and will lead to some sort of climax around a month from now, or two and a half weeks from now / through January, I guess. So
right.
I have to see what happens then, and then that will determine how I finish writing this thing.
Fair enough. Well, we will keep an eager eye out for it nonetheless. Justin, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Justin. Love your work.
Right, here's a newish thing for the show. It's the second time that we've got a listener question. As we mentioned, we're on Patreon now. There's going to be a monthly bonus episode. There's one there right now, which was me and Nikki chatting. There's also my full conversation with Dorian there as well. And we'll be doing listener question sections in that if you want to send plenty of them over. So go sign up. Let's get chatting. Visit patreon.com/American Friction. Sign up. There's a link in the show notes. So here's a question that was sent to us via email. If you want to email us, it's americanfriction@podmasters.co.uk.
Why have you said email like that?
Email, because I think email is very innovative, and it's E, which means internet, I believe. Yeah.
E for internet.
E stands for internet.
That's good.
If you're ever on the phone and you need to do the phonetic alphabet, E for internet.
Oh, good.
Anyway, this is from Natasha House. I have a question. I can't remember being discussed yet. I don't imagine that they speak like this.
No.
People speculate about shy Trump voters who won't admit they will vote for him but secretly do and result in him doing better in elections than expected. With the overturning of Roe versus Wade, I wonder if there are shy Harris voters among Republican women all over the country. They wouldn't ever say they will vote Democrat, but will do so to fight for their reproductive rights. I would love to hear your opinion on that. Nikki, I would love to hear your opinion on that.
Essentially, I think yes. I think there are a lot of women, maybe Republican women, definitely independent and moderate women, who may tend to vote Republican, but are willing to vote for Harris given the issues of reproductive rights that are on the ballot. And I think the thing that gives me the confidence to say that is some of these ballot measures that have been passed in swing states in like off-cycle elections, aiming to put abortion rights into state constitutions. Overwhelmingly, we've seen them be successful. And in a lot of these states, there's not really a lot of wiggle room for Democrats to pass those sorts of ballot measures unilaterally without sort of a broader coalition of support that includes independents, moderates, and some Republicans. And I think the reality in the United States is the ballot is secret. No one is checking over your shoulder to see who you voted for. So as much as some women might, because of their families, because of their social circles, because of pressure from their communities, publicly support Trump, there is always the chance that someone goes into the ballot box and votes for Harris. Now, the caveat here is I don't know specifically what number or like what percentage of people that might represent. I don't think we'll know until we get exit polls after the election. But I also don't think it's something that Democrats can bank on to swing the election. The thing that wins you elections is committed voters who you can bring over, and like winning over those undecided people. I think the Harris campaign has done some work attempting to appeal to Republican women, to like suburban moderates, suburban conservative leaning independents about the abortion issue. But I think the campaign is much more focused on winning that sort of explicitly gettable demographic of independent, undecided voters than they are about trying to convince Republicans to secretly vote for Harris, if that makes sense.
Oh,
have you got anything to add?
I've got things to say.
Yes.
Well, who made that noise then?
Yeah.
Oh, it's you.
No, it was,
thought it was Yoda. Yeah. Yoda on the pod.
Yoda on the pod.
I think this is a difficult one to answer, and the word secret is probably the key there. If people don't tell others the way they vote, it's hard to know exactly. But we do have some data,
sure.
Especially on white women in America, which is the biggest, I guess, demographic of group of women. I think it's about 40% of the electorate or something like that. So it's a massive chunk. And historically, white women have voted Republican. I think it's only 2 times over the past century or something like that, decades, that they've actually favored the Democratic candidate. In fact, in 2016, it was basically split between Trump and Clinton. But then in 2020, Trump was actually favored 53% to 47%. There is evidence, though, that this is changing. Gallup did some research into how liberal white women are feeling today in terms of their political identification. And they found that between 2001 and 2007, 28% of white women felt as if they were, outrightly liberal. Now, in 2024, it's 41%. So there is a change in ideology here. And it seems if that trend continues, then... Well, this is especially amongst younger white women. So if that trend continues and young white women continue to feel more liberal than they previously have done in the past, then you can probably start to see that might be a base for the Democratic Party. You also look at some polling right now that I think Harry Enton, who's a political analyst formerly of 538, has done. And he said this in a quote to Newsweek. He said that Trump is doing the worst if this holds for a GOP candidate this century among white women. So we could be seeing a massive amount of damage done by Trump when it comes to women as well. So maybe the overturning of Roe v. Wade isn't just the only thing that sways women. It could just be Trump himself.
So you've gone for some real data there. I've looked into some anecdotal evidence here and basically found a thread on Reddit, on the r/Kamala Harris Reddit there, of someone just simply asking, are there shy voters out there? And there are quite a few people replying anonymously or through their whatever names they have on Reddit, but saying, coming from an evangelical background, I can tell you there are wives who in the privacy of the voting booth will vote for Harris. I'm one of them in real life. I'm very active on here, but not vocal about politics outside of the internet and immediate family. There's plenty of them. Yeah, I am one. I live in a small town in a safe red state, so I avoid saying anything to anyone outside of my family or very close friends. And that's the other point I think really, when we talk about shy voters, there's probably just a massive part of the demographic and across the world really, of just people who don't speak about politics very much at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not necessarily just shy voters. People like ourselves who are very in tune with it imagine that everyone has these sort of conversations. There's a lot of people who probably don't think about politics that much and don't discuss it with people around them, and that you don't know which way they're gonna go.
And also, you've got to remember, especially for British listeners, how incredibly religious the US is compared to us, and issues like abortion for women are really hard to talk about in especially religious families. They just don't want to bring it up because it could cause all kinds of issues. They could be disowned. God forbid anything else. It's just a very difficult issue to discuss, and therefore to tell people who are voting different to you the way that you're voting, because it could be dangerous.
And on that note, that brings us to the end of this episode of American Friction. Nikki, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, gentlemen.
Chris, thank you very much.
Yeah. You're welcome. I do like the idea of gravy ice cream, though.
Yeah, I think it'd be good. Gravy and bean
I
ice
hate
cream
that.
on a little double scoop.
Shall we try
hate
it?
that.
In a Yorkshire pudding cone.
You're talking my bloody language, son.
I know I am.
But thank you, Joff, for being on the podcast as ever.
That's, you're welcome. Right, listeners, we've got something to ask you to do. We want this podcast to keep going on forever and ever and ever, and I hope that you do as well. But for that to be the case, we need your support. So if you could spare a little space for us in your heart and bank account, you could go to patreon.com/American Friction to support us. Help the pod going. From £3 a month, you'll get the episodes ad-free and early. And then there are tiers where you get bonus content and you can even get merch. There's plenty more stuff.
Pretty
to
cool
listen to.
t-shirt in there.
There are
that
some
I'm gonna
cool
get.
shirts. Yeah, there's a very cool shirt. So yeah, look, just help us out. We'd really appreciate it if you can. Also, look, if you can want to help us in another way, just go down, rate, review, comment, and subscribe. Do all the stuff you can on your app to show that you love us, because we hope you do, and we love you. Thank you very much. You've been listening to American Friction. We'll see you next time.